In 2023, Walt Disney Animation Studios celebrated its 100-year anniversary. It's been a very long way since Walt and Roy Disney founded their own animation studio back in 1923. It was a dream come true for a 21-year-old Walt Disney, who was deeply in love with the world of animation. Disney brothers started the studio having hopes to make a living off their animation, but they certainly couldn't expect what was awaiting them in the future. Decades of animation, huge successes and failures, universal acclaim, technological advancements, wealth, and a lot of controversy. This is a brief history of Walt Disney Animation Studios. To start our journey, let's travel back in time, the very start of the 20th century. A century that changed and redefined human civilization forever. Walter Elias Disney was born on December 5, 1901 in Chicago, Illinois. Walt was the fourth son of Elias Disney, a Canadian-American entrepreneur and a construction worker. In 1906, the Disney family moved to a farm in Marceline, Missouri. On the farm, young Walt began drawing animals and developed his interest in art. In 1911, the family moved again, this time to Kansas City. At the local Benton Grammar School, Walt became acquainted with Walter Pfeiffer. Being from a family of theater lovers, Pfeiffer was the first to introduce Walt to vaudeville and motion pictures. Walt Disney briefly returned to Chicago in 1917, after which he joined the Red Cross Ambulance Corps and went to France and Germany. Both countries were absolutely devastated after World War I. This brief trip to Europe greatly inspired Disney's artistic vision. He would draw cartoons in his free time, and some of his works were even published by the army newspaper called Stars and Stripes. In 1919, Walt returned to Kansas City and began working as an artist for a company called the Passman Rubin Commercial Art. This is where he met another talented aspiring cartoonist named Ab Iwerks. Due to very modest revenue, Disney and Iwerks had to leave Passman Rubin. Disney returned back to Kansas City to make some money. He worked for a film ad company run by a businessman named Arthur Gallagher. The company produced commercials using cutout style of animation, though Walt always preferred celluloid traditional animation over cutout. While working for a film ad company, Disney began experimenting with animation. He tried to convince Gallagher to switch to celluloid animation, but his attempts to change his boss's mind were all in vain. For this reason, Disney had to leave the company. He and his colleague from film ad company Fred Harman started their own company called Laugh-O-Gram Studio. Walt Disney invited Iwerks to work with him. Laugh-O-Gram went to bankruptcy very soon, in 1923. To save the studio, Disney began to work on Alice's Wonderland, a fascinating 12-minute movie which combined animation with live-action elements. The film was about a young and curious girl named Alice, played by Virginia Davis, who visits Laugh-O-Gram Studio where the animators show her various scenes of the drawing boards. However, even this film couldn't save Laugh-O-Gram, and the studio was closed. Walt Disney didn't give up. He and his older brother Roy moved to Los Angeles in 1923. Although New York was the center of animation at that moment, California climate was much better for Roy Disney, who suffered from tuberculosis. Walt tried to sell Alice's Wonderland. First success came from New York film distributor Margaret J. Winkler, the founder of M.J. Winkler Pictures. Walt and Roy signed a contract to produce a series of animated shorts called the Alice Comedies. On October 16, 1923, a century ago, using Roy's money, Walt and his older brother started a company, which they called the Disney Brothers Studio. Walt and Roy launched the studio at a small office located in 4651 Kingsville Avenue, Los Angeles. There they started working on the Alice Comedies. The series was distributed by Winkler Pictures. In 1925, Disney found a new location, at Hyperion Avenue. The studio moved there in January 1926 and was renamed into Walt Disney Studio. In 1924, Margaret Winkler married a man named Charles Mintz. Eventually, Mintz overtook his wife's company. Mintz wasn't satisfied with the production costs of the Alice Comedies, so he asked Disney to develop a new character. Walt Disney and Up Iwerks created Oswald the Rabbit character, and in 1927 they started production of Oswald the Lucky Rabbit series for Universal Pictures. It was a fully animated series of shorts featuring an iconic character Oswald the Rabbit. In 1928, Charles Mintz, once again trying to decrease expenses, offered Disney lower advancement payment for Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, the condition that Disney refused to accept. As a result, Disney lost all the rights to his own character, as rights to Oswald were owned by Universal Pictures. After that, Mintz set up his own animation studio called Winkler Studio in order to produce cheaply made Oswald the Lucky Rabbit cartoons. Most of the staff that worked for Disney was hired away by Mintz, but Up Iwerks didn't go to work for Mintz, even though the prospect was promising enough. Disney was maliciously betrayed by Charles Mintz, who effectively stole the character that Disney and Iwerks developed. What to do when you lose rights to your own popular character? Disney and Iwerks do have an answer: create a new character, even more iconic. Thus, in 1928, the duo developed a character that would later become a symbol that is impossible to separate from Disney today: Mickey Mouse. The first two Mickey Mouse shorts, Plain Crazy and The Galloping Gaucho, premiered in the summer of 1928. The third cartoon, Steamboat Willie, was the first Disney's cartoon with synchronized sound. For this short, Disney collaborated with the composer Carl Stalling and businessman Pat Powers, who provided Disney with a cinephone sound on film process. The cartoon was a major success upon its debut in November 1928. The Mickey Mouse animated series quickly became the most successful animated series in America. The second series created by Walt Disney Studios was Silly Symphonies, started in 1929 with the famous short The Skeleton Dance. Silly Symphonies allowed animators and writers to create something more experimental, more unique, more unorthodox compared to safer Mickey Mouse cartoons. Despite success, financial disagreement happened between Walt Disney and Pat Powers. As a result, Disney renamed the studio into Walt Disney Productions and signed a contract with Columbia Pictures. Powers, in his turn, signed away Up Iwerks, who eventually returned to Disney in 1940. In 1932, Disney signed a new distribution deal with United Artists. The same year, he signed a contract with Technicolor, which allowed Disney to produce his first 3-color cartoon, a Silly Symphonies episode called Flowers and Trees, which won an Oscar in Best Cartoon category. The following year, another cartoon, Three Little Pigs, became a box office success and a huge cultural phenomenon. A huge success came to Walt Disney and his studio after years of hardship. It allowed Disney to work and make money even when the infamous Great Depression hit the United States in 1929 and practically collapsed the American economy. In 1934, Disney announced the production of the studio's first feature film, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Originally, this idea was perceived as a folly, as most people didn't believe in the success of a full-length animated movie. However, Disney held a very different opinion. He pretty much gambled. The future of Disney Studio depended on the success of Snow White. It was a big risk. And the risk paid off, as Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs started a whole new era which defined Disney and changed the animation as a medium forever. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs was released in 1937. The movie was a huge financial success. With a budget of $1.4 million, it grossed almost $8 million worldwide. It was very successful both domestically in the US and Canada, and internationally, as it was an unprecedented box office hit in Australia and in the UK. The movie launched a period in Disney history commonly known today as the Golden Age. The Mickey Mouse series was very successful in the 1930s. Mickey Mouse was joined by other iconic characters such as Pluto, Goofy, and Donald Duck. Donald Duck would eventually eclipse even Mickey Mouse himself, especially in Europe, where Donald Duck became a cultural phenomenon after the Second World War. Silly Symphonies, a series that brought Disney 7 Oscars, ceased to exist in 1939. The huge success of Snow White allowed Disney to build a new, much bigger studio on Buena Vista Street in Burbank. The headquarters of the Walt Disney Company remains there to this day. In 1940, Walt Disney Production had its initial public offering, with Walt as the president and Rob as a CEO. Following the success of Snow White, Disney launched several feature films into production. In the year of 1940, the studio had 2 movies, not one. Pinocchio, which won 2 Oscars for Best Score and Best Song, but wasn't a box office success, and with a budget of $2.3 million, earned less than $2 million. Another movie released that year was an experimental monumental Fantasia, with an accompanying epic orchestral arrangement conducted by Leopold Stokowski, one of the greatest conductors of the 20th century. Fantasia costed even more money than Pinocchio, but similarly underperformed at the box office. Animation was supervised by a group of core animators who became known as Nine Old Men, one of whom, Wolfgang Reitermann, continued producing and directing cartoons after Walt's death 2.5 decades later. The establishment of 9 Old Men led to the caste system at Disney Studios. Lesser animators were tasked with creating short animation, while feature movies were supervised exclusively by the 9 Old Men, who became an elite of Disney Studios. This development led to a bitter strike among animators in 1941. Animators tried to unionize as they felt they weren't treated fairly by Walt Disney. Disney himself was against unions and felt personally betrayed by the animators. This led to exodus of several important animators such as John Hubley, who along with other artists established United Production of America, which was Disney's biggest competitor in the 1950s. The next 2 Disney movies were Dumbo and Bambi. Dumbo was a financial success due to its cheap budget. The movie cost less than $1 million and grossed $1.6 million. But Bambi was a failure. With a budget of $1.7 million, it grossed only just slightly more than Dumbo. This is where the golden age of Disney animation ends. It came to an end due to a variety of reasons, not just financial situation. Worker strike, caste system, World War II, which was raging in Europe and Asia. During the war, Disney cooperated with the US military to produce patriotic propaganda cartoons featuring prominent characters like Donald Duck, made to boost the morale among civilians and soldiers. Another reason why Golden Age ended is that a lot of Disney animators were drafted into the military after Imperial Japan bombed Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, dragging the US into the war against the Axis powers. The 1940s were a tough period for Disney. The studio had to focus on producing short animation, documentaries, and movies that combined animation with live action. During the Franklin Roosevelt presidency, he initiated the so-called Good Neighbor policy towards Latin America to compensate for decades of military and political intervention. Many animators went on trips to South America. As a result, we got films like Saludos Amigos and The Three Caballeros. In 1946, Disney released the very controversial Song of the South, a movie which modern Disney desperately wants to forget for its racist nature. Song of the South has been accused of romanticizing life on plantations of the American South and portraying black people in an offensively stereotypical way, as illiterate and servile people who are happy to serve white people. The movie was quite controversial even in 1946 when it was initially released. And because of the Jim Crow laws in southern states, the actor who played Uncle Remus, James Baskett, wasn't even allowed to attend the movie premiere in Atlanta, Georgia. In order to raise some money during a difficult period of time, Disney began re-releasing the movies. It started with Snow White, which was released again in theaters in 1944. Thus, the tradition of re-releasing movies every 7 years began, and it proved to be a very successful practice which lasted until the 1990s, when it was stopped by the emergence of home media like VHS. Initial box office failures like Pinocchio turned to profit because of the re-releases. The period of time during and immediately after the war was very tough for Disney. The studio planned several full-length cartoons, but the studio's sponsors refused to loan the money during the wartime. The production of those feature movies was postponed and only resumed after World War II ended. Those films would start a whole new era of Disney animation. The first fully animated movie released in 8 years since Bambi was Cinderella in 1950. With a budget of $3 million, it desperately needed to be a success for Disney. And it was. The movie grossed over $4 million, which opened the door for a new Disney era. If Cinderella wasn't successful, a lot of things could have been different. The art director at that time was Mary Blair. She supervised Cinderella and two other movies, Alice in Wonderland and Peter Pan, which gave both a unique distinct style and feel which set the three movies apart from the movies of the Golden Age. She was inspired by a trip to South America. However, after the completion of work on Peter Pan, Blair resigned from Disney and became a freelance graphic designer. That's why Lady and the Tramp was made in a more classical style similar to the Golden Age. Lady and the Tramp was the biggest financial success since Snow White, earning $6.5 million at the box office. In the 1950s and 1960s, Disney focused its attention on live-action movies. After 4 animated movies in the first half of the decade, we only saw one in the second half. Sleeping Beauty, released in 1959, was the most expensive Disney animated movie with $6 million budget, and in its initial theatrical run made only $5.3 million. Sleeping Beauty cost that much because it was the first movie to be made in Super Technirama 70 format. The movie was heavily stylized by a prominent artist, Ivan Earl. In the 50s and 60s, Disney released some very remarkable live-action movies such as 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, Pollyanna, the compilation of stories about Davy Crockett, a legendary frontiersman and politician, and Mary Poppins, a highly successful family movie that made $31 million in its initial box office run. By the end of the 1950s, the production of short animation mostly stopped. Personnel who worked on these shorts either left Disney or were reassigned to work on Disney television programs such as The Mickey Mouse Club and Disneyland. Released in 1961, 101 Dalmatians popularized the use of xerography, the technique which allowed animators to photochemically transfer drawings onto cells. This technique once again changed how Disney animation looked. 101 Dalmatians and the next Disney cartoon, The Sword in the Stone, were very successful financially. The production for Jungle Book, a loose adaptation of Rudyard Kipling's book, was approved. On December 15, 1966, Walt Disney died, just 10 months before the Jungle Book became a big success. The death of Walt Disney led to drastic change and a period of time that almost ended Disney animation. After Walt's death, his role as a director and producer was taken by one of the 9 old men, Wolfgang Reitermann, more commonly known as Wooly Reitermann. In 1970, Aristocats, the last project personally approved by Walt Disney, was released. In 1971, Roy Disney, Walt's older brother and co-founder of the company, died. Walt Disney Productions was essentially left in the hands of 2 businessmen, Don Tatum and Curt Walker. This drastic change led to a significant reduction of budgets and reuse of animation from previous features. This is why there are so many scenes in Robin Hood that were repurposed from previous films, especially from Jungle Book. The Rescuers, released in 1977, was a big success. This movie marked the change of the hierarchy within the studio. As 9 old men began to retire one by one, a new generation of talented animators such as Don Bluth, Ron Clements and John Musker came to the studio. They first got a chance to display their skills in a hybrid movie called Pete's Dragon, which combined elements of live action and animation. Animated sequences were directed by Don Bluth. However, dissatisfied with the corporate nature of Disney, Bluth made the decision to leave Disney in 1979. It was a very hard choice because working for Disney was Bluth's dream from a very young age. Don Bluth established his own animation studio called Sal Bluth Studios. Sal Bluth Studios became Disney's main rival in the 1980s with movies like An American Tail, The Land Before Time, The Secret of NIMH, and All Dogs Go to Heaven. Eventually, however, the studio filed bankruptcy in 1995. As for Disney Animation, The Fox and the Hound, their first cartoon in the 1980s, was moved from December of 1980 to the summer of 1981 due to Bluth's departure. The movie became a box office success, but the reception by critics was rather cold. The biggest criticism the movie received was that it didn't break any new grounds from technological perspective and storytelling perspective. In 1985, Disney released The Black Cauldron, the movie that is considered to be rock bottom of Disney. Disney wanted to expand its audience by making something more mature. The adaptation of Lloyd Alexander's The Chronicles of Prydain was chosen for that purpose. Apart from very cold reception, the Black Cauldron resulted in colossal financial losses. According to the film's production manager Don Hahn, the Black Cauldron cost $44 million to produce, which made it the most expensive animated feature at that moment. It grossed only $21 million. The movie was supposed to celebrate new promising artists such as Brad Bird and Tim Burton, but instead it turned into a financial horror show. In 1983, 2 years prior to the release of Black Cauldron, another promising animator, John Lasseter, was fired from Disney for trying to promote computer animation. Later he became the creative head of Pixar and worked on the groundbreaking movie Toy Story. Pixar as we know it today was founded in 1986 when Steve Jobs purchased the company The Graphic Group, which belonged to Lucasfilm. 2 years earlier, on February 15, 1984, Ron Miller, the CEO of Disney at that time, founded Touchstone Pictures, a company that focused on production of more mature adult-oriented content, which could not be released under the Disney family-friendly logo. The most remarkable films made by Touchstone include Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Dead Poets Society, and The Night Before Christmas. In 1984, Roy Disney Jr., a nephew of Walt Disney, resigned from the board of directors. He was replaced by Michael Eisner, who became a new CEO of the company, with Jeffrey Katzenberg as chairman of the film division. After the huge financial losses which followed the Black Cauldron, Eisner even considered shutting the feature animation studio and instead focusing on live action, television, and theme parks. But Roy Disney Jr. didn't allow this to happen. He became the head of the feature animation division, while Eisner established Walt Disney Pictures Television to focus on cheap and short animation exclusively for television. In 1986, animation staff had to move from their comfortable studio in Burbank, where they worked previous years, to various warehouses, trailers, and hangars nearby Glendale, which caused a lot of distress within the animation division. The studio was renamed into Walt Disney Feature Animation. The first animated movie released after the move was The Great Mouse Detective. The feature film was critically and financially successful, so it instilled some hope in Roy Disney Jr. and the animation division of Disney Company. He, Katzenberg, and Peter Schneider, president of animation appointed by Roy himself, intended to completely change the working ethics at the studio and produce one movie each year instead of every 2 or 3 years. The studio had intended to invite more popular actors to voice the characters, and popular musicians to write songs. This way the studio intended to attract more attention from the public and to reinvigorate tarnished interest in Disney feature animation. Don Bluth, An American Tale, and The Land Before Time were very successful, which clearly indicated that audiences wanted to see animation on the big screen. Disney wanted to step up their game and bring back the magic that the studio lost in the past decades. The first attempt was Oliver and the Company, released in 1988, starring Billy Joel, who was at the apogee of his career. But the actual return to greatness would happen in the next year. 1989 became the start of the most successful period of the 20th century Disney animation. The period that largely shaped the way we perceive Disney today. The Renaissance was 11 years from 1989 to 1999. In this period of time, Disney released their most iconic and beloved cartoons, hailed by critics and casual viewers alike. They launched Disney popularity to space to a level that the studio had never seen before, even during the Golden Age. It started with The Little Mermaid. Even though Jeffrey Katzenberg was very cautious about this film, The Little Mermaid became the first animated blockbuster. It made over $100 million in its initial theatrical run in 1989. It was very successful among critics and casual viewers as well, dwarfing all the other Disney movies released in the 1980s. The Little Mermaid received 2 academic awards for the best song and best score. The following movie, Rescuers Down Under, was the first sequel released in theaters. It didn't replicate the success of The Little Mermaid. But The Beauty and the Beast, released in 1991, was a roaring commercial and critical success. It made $331 million worldwide and received 6 Oscars nominations, including for Best Picture. Released the next year, Aladdin made $504 million worldwide. Another fantastic record. Disney skipped 1993. That year Henry Selick's The Nightmare Before Christmas, produced by Touchstone Pictures, was released. Disney reserved 1994 for their next animated movie. The one that is still considered the absolute best movie created by Disney, and one of the greatest animated movies ever released. The Lion King. The Hamlet-inspired story of a young exiled Prince Simba who returns home to reclaim his throne grossed $768 million. The Lion King is the highest grossing traditional animated movie to date. With its re-releases, the overall box office increased to $968 million. Tons of money Disney made on merchandise. The Lion King had a cast full of big stars, including James Earl Jones and Jeremy Irons, and songs written by Elton John. Around that time, Disney found another way to make money. Sequels to classical cartoons released straight to home media. They were extremely cheap to produce and made some pretty decent money. The first one was The Return of Jafar, an Aladdin sequel released in 1994. The next movie after The Lion King was a highly controversial Pocahontas. Similarly to The Song of the South, which sugar-coated horrible experiences of black people in the US, Pocahontas sugar-coated trauma that native peoples of North America experienced after white colonizers came to their shores. The life of Pocahontas herself was portrayed completely inaccurately. Her life full of struggle and pain was turned into a rather trivial love story. Pocahontas received a lot of fair criticism. So did The Hunchback of Notre Dame, a very loose adaptation of Victor Hugo's masterpiece, but for different reasons, as parents thought this movie was too dark and mature for their children. The movie was also criticized for simplifying the original novel Notre Dame de Paris and stripping the story of its most crucial elements, turning a very grim story into a family-friendly film. Both Pocahontas and The Hunchback of Notre Dame were financially successful. So were the next three movies, Hercules, Mulan, and Tarzan, the last of which was released in 1999. The Disney studio in Paris in the meantime was producing animation for television, including the famous A Goofy movie released in 1995. The same year, Pixar released the groundbreaking computer animated movie Toy Story, directed by former Disney animator John Lasseter, who was fired from the studio in the 1980s. Disney became the distributor of Pixar movies up until the mid-2000s, when the Disney company simply bought Pixar. In 1994, Jeffrey Katzenberg resigned from Disney after the CEO Michael Eisner refused to promote him to president of Disney company. According to Eisner, Roy Disney Jr., still a very influential figure at the company, simply disliked Katzenberg. Katzenberg and Steven Spielberg founded DreamWorks Animation Studios in 1994. The renaissance of Disney ended in 1999 with Tarzan, and it was the beginning of a rather strange period in Disney history that once again changed the animation forever. Throughout the 1990s, Roy Disney Jr. was lobbying a project that he was dreaming of. This film was Fantasia 2000, finally released in December 1999, almost 60 years after the original Fantasia. This highly ambitious project was supposed to pay homage to Walt Disney and the original Disney classics from the Golden Age. Fantasia 2000 was the first animated movie to be released in IMAX format. With a budget of $90 million, the movie made exactly $90 million at the box office. Disney lost a lot of money and had the first box office bomb in over a decade. In October 1999, Disney formed a visual effects studio called The Secret Lab, which produced one CGI movie for Disney. Dinosaur, released in 2000. It earned less than the studio anticipated, so the Secret Lab was shut down almost immediately. The 2000s were a period when computer animation became the new hot thing in theaters. Pixar was perfecting 3D animation and creating bold fascinating stories that Disney itself wouldn't even dare to touch. Pixar replaced Disney as the main animation studio. There was also DreamWorks with their massively popular Shrek franchise. Shrek was a parody of classical Disney fairy tales, making a lot of fun of classical Disney tropes, a revenge by Katzenberg. Disney almost completely abandoned the Renaissance formula. The studio attempted to diversify their audience by releasing two sci-fi movies, Atlantis in 2001 and Treasure Planet, a reimagination of classical adventure novel by Robert Louis Stevenson in 2002, but both bombed at the box office. The Emperor's New Groove severely underperformed, grossing only $169 million with a $100 million budget. Disney seemingly lost all of its magic and returned to the uncertainty of the Bronze Age. Disney movies performed so much worse compared to their counterparts from Pixar, DreamWorks, and even Blue Sky. Because of that, Disney concluded that hand-drawn animation was becoming obsolete and that the animation studio had to focus on computer animation instead. A lot of workers from the studio lost their jobs. The morale plummeted once again. A studio in Paris that specialized in TV animation was closed in 2003. From 2005 to 2008, Disney released 3 mildly successful computer animated movies: Chicken Little, Meet the Robinsons, and Bolt. All 3 weren't exactly smashing hits. In 2005, Bob Iger became the CEO of the Disney company. In 2006, Disney finalized the purchase of Pixar Animation Studio, which, despite being a part of Disney, continued functioning completely independently from Disney Animation Studios. In 2004, after the release of Home on the Range, Disney announced that the production of traditional animated movies would be halted. In 2006, after Disney purchased Pixar, Walt Disney Feature Animation was once again renamed into Walt Disney Animation Studios, the name that the studio holds to this day. John Lasseter became the chief creative officer at Walt Disney Animation Studios. He reversed the decision to stop producing hand-drawn animation. In 2006, Disney started working on 2 movies, The Princess and the Frog and Rapunzel. By creating a princess movie, Disney intended to bring the lost magic back, just like in the late 1980s when Disney Animation was similarly struggling to survive. The studio needed to chase away the darkness of the post-Renaissance era and return Disney to its lost throne. The post-Renaissance era came to an end with Bolt in 2008. And then, 14 years ago, a completely new era began.